Pause record.
All right, so did I skip over one here? Let's make sure we're all still good. Yeah, so this is a great quote, another great quote from a famous person, John Maynard Keynes. When the information changes, I alter my conclusions. What do you do, sir? So it was a party where he was being criticized for changing his monetary policy. And it's been paraphrased, well, when the facts change, I change my mind. What do you do, sir? And it's good advice, okay? So be on guard against self-identifying with knowledge that is outside of your control. You may be the authority on what you're thinking and feeling, but you may not be the authority on something that is externally visible, externally available for basically scientific testing, checking, by others. And if it turns out that what you thought was right turns out to be wrong, you should, own up to it and say, oh, wow, okay, I thought pretty confidently that was correct, but now I see that there's new information here and it's all wrong. Don't over-attach, don't self-identify is the way I use that word. Just let go of it if it turns out not to be true. This is a similar quote in a way. So what James Watson was trying to get across was the idea that really, if you're going to make a big leap, nobody is really obviously in a position to do that. And in fact, even Richard Feynman, when he talks about the nature of scientific method, he says, well, how do we come up with these hypotheses? And he says, you guess. And he's totally correct. You make a guess. Now, if you're a good scientist, you might be better at artfully guessing in the right direction more often than if you're not. But it's still a guess. And then what's needed is the hard work of filling in the gap between where you have leaped out to and all the rest of knowledge that is pretty well verified, or let's say pretty well supported, has a high weight of evidence. You've still got to fill that in with more testing and more logic and getting it to all fit together so that everybody else can also agree, yeah, I think this is all solid. I'm not a big fan of Mark Zuckerberg, so please don't accuse me of that. I know Facebook the name is mud these days, but this is a good quote, so I got to give him that. Movies and pop culture get this all wrong. The idea of a single eureka moment is a dangerous lie. It makes us feel inadequate since we haven't had ours yet. It prevents people with seeds of good ideas from getting started. The Lizard Man. I didn't say that, okay? This is going to end up on YouTube. I just want to know if that wasn't me who said the Lizard Man. I should probably not look at the chat here, or at least not say what I'm seeing if it's going to be a little over the top. Okay. So you might think, well, Rick, I'm an independent human being. I have the right to believe exactly what I want. And Mother Nature will respond, do you really think you can do so without consequences? Remember, the reason our brains work, the reason we have brains is so we can actually be successful. So if you come up with and attach yourself dogmatically to ideas that are wrong, you've got to expect there's going to be consequences. So the number one consequence I want to talk about briefly is anxiety. So anxiety is your organism's signal that you're not in optimal contact with reality. Contact with either the outer world or the inner world or both, okay? It could be either. It is a persistent fear, a chronic fear of a threat that is not conscious. So the fear may have an object which we genuinely want to know but need help in identifying. So it doesn't necessarily mean you're repressing the knowledge, although it might or it might not. But it is fairly common that we also ourselves have some complicity in avoiding the short-term pain of such awarenesses by avoiding awareness, by refusing to really engage our curiosity and really wanting to work our way through it. So we have the power through habitual muscle tension, the work of Wilhelm Reich and Alexander Lowen and later psychologists, to block awareness through chronic muscle tension. When you tense your muscles, you also inhibit the ability to feel. And when you inhibit the ability to feel, you inhibit the ability to think. And when you inhibit both of these, and you do them chronically and habitually, your mind realizes, oh, he doesn't want to think about this. Let's automate the process and save ourselves the energy expenditure of having to go through this and then get all worked up and then just end up avoiding it anyway. Okay, so you contrast this with the exhilarating exchange you might have with a scientist on a conclusion, and you get a lively uncovering of differing evidence and reasonings, and one of you, or maybe both of you, are actually going to learn something and come out of it better off, because both of you have the truth as your number one priority and not self-preservation of maybe some image or ego. So yeah, I got to contrast this with the endless political and dogma wars that are still going on today, and even worse in the past. And why is it so? Because good scientists will quickly acknowledge when the evidence reveals their wrong conclusions. They learn and they move on, and they do it quickly. Scientists listen to reality. And so the progress of science is lightning fast compared to the progress of, politics and dogmatic areas. So habitual avoidance of truth has other consequences too. Your inner self takes note, leading to a lessened self-trust in your ability to think. A lessened trust in your level of life ambitions changes for the worse. Defensiveness emerges in having any intellectual conversations at all. Your choice of friends may head towards a lower level. You may find yourself more comfortable, more relaxed around people to whom you can compare yourself favorably rather than around people who can inspire you to rise to their level. And of course, there's physical damage as well. So there may be physical organic damage that also is involved in chronic anxiety, so I don't want to dismiss that. That's tragic, and what can you say? It's a terrible thing. But if you read what the National Institute of Mental Health has to say about it, they will tell you that talk therapy, in other words, improving your thinking, is much more effective, much more successful than drugs in trying to get people past chronic anxiety. It really is your organism signal. There's something you need to pay attention to, and you're not paying attention to it. Again, it may be because it's so complex that you, despite sincere efforts, can't achieve clarity. Maybe you'll need help. No shame in that. So chronic anxiety can also lead to chronic depression if it goes on too long. Depression carries with it the feeling of, here is something I can neither endure nor challenge, is the way one psychologist put it. I can't endure this, and I also can't change it or challenge it. And then that leads to depression. Okay, how much does Mother Nature care about my opinion? Anybody want to guess? My video off?
Zero.
Oh, okay. Do you really want to see my face? I guess since I'm not eating, we can do that.
Well, that's the...
Okay, I'm still here. So my video's back on. Somebody alerted me to that. Okay. So how much does Mother Nature care? She doesn't care. Thank you for understanding that right away. 0, that's how much. She only cares about one thing, what's true. She doesn't care about my opinion. She doesn't care about anybody else's either. So maybe the most essential aspect of really growing up, really achieving adulthood, is accepting that and learning that it is us who have to conform to Mother Nature, because Mother Nature's laws are never, ever violated. They're obeyed down to the last decimal, always, and they're available to be tested, and we have tested them all the way out to the most distant quasars, 13 billion years into the past. And even biology is based ultimately on physics, and psychology is based on biology. And so in some sense, even though, yes, we are emergent phenomena, there's a truth there that you really can't get around. It's arrogant for us to dictate to Mother Nature what is true in violation of the evidence. And it kind of reminds me of, an infant who, when they're not happy, what do? The only thing they know how to do, which is to scream and yell. And eventually they learn language and they learn how to communicate, and, that gets to a better place. But some people grow up more slowly than others, unfortunately. So this was a light bulb moment for me back in 1985, seeing this movie. There's Harrison Ford in the movie Witness. And I don't know if any of you have seen the movie. It's a really good movie. And it's at one point, Rachel, who's the Kelly McGillis character, says, "But Mr. Book, you said we'd be safe here." This is after he discovers that the killer he seeks is a colleague policeman, and things go bad. And he responds in a resounding voice, "Well, I was wrong." And I'd never heard an admission of that made so undefensively, so naturally, so completely without apology, and with such enthusiastic willingness to instantly accept the new situation. Nobody in my childhood or neighborhood ever showed such an attitude. There was always defensiveness and, oh, I don't want to admit I was wrong, and, that kind of thing. So that had a real impact on me. I realized, wow, it's okay to make mistakes. We will make them. I will make them. You will make them. I have made them. You have made them. And, okay, it's not a big deal. It's not something you want to do, but they'll happen whether you want to or not. They'll happen. And so the thing to do is learn to live with it, accept the responsibility for thought, and move on, trying to figure out what's right. Don't stay stuck. Maybe some of you can think of some political people who don't do that. Maybe I shouldn't have said that, but anyway. Is it rude to challenge belief systems? I'll ask it in a different way. Is college a place where a young person should insist that no idea ever be presented which might cause them to reevaluate their own prejudices and current beliefs? So I would say, no, that is not what college should be about. Are you sure you'll never learn anything importantly new for the rest of your life, but instead just details? And is that really a desirable place to be? It should be a fun place to have things challenged. Mother Nature challenges your beliefs at every moment. Disbelieve in the law of gravity and try to float off a tall building. Nature will be very rude to you. So align yourself with what's true. Do you want the red pill or the blue pill? So you guys remember the Matrix. Which was the pill that actually took you to reality? Grim as it was. It was the red pill. The blue pill. When the story ends, you wake up in your bed, you believe whatever you want to believe. Take the red pill, you stay in Wonderland, although Wonderland was actually the weird reality of the movie. And I show you how deep the rabbit hole goes. So hopefully if you take the red pill, you don't end up in the Matrix. Okay, so that's my hope. Okay, what about pseudoscience? So when certain people use the trappings and jargon of science to lend an aura of credibility and high-mindedness to an otherwise bogus body of thought, we call this a pseudoscience. So there's a whole bunch of them. This is from Carl Sagan, another one of the great communicators of science. Pseudoscience differs from erroneous science. Science thrives on errors, cutting them away one by one. False conclusions are drawn all the time, but they're drawn tentatively. Hypotheses are framed, so they're capable of being disproved if they turn out to be wrong. A succession of alternative hypotheses is confronted by experiment and observation. Science gropes and staggers towards improved understanding. I wouldn't say it staggers. I would say it it walks at a measured pace towards improved understanding for the most part. Staggering sounds a little negative to me, but anyway. Proprietary feelings are, of course, offended when a scientific hypothesis is disproved, but such disproofs are recognized as central to the scientific enterprise. Pseudoscience is just the opposite. Hypotheses are often framed precisely so they are invulnerable to any experiment that offers the prospect of disproof. So even in principle, they cannot be invalidated. Practitioners are defensive and wary. Skeptical scrutiny is opposed. When the pseudoscientific hypothesis fails to catch fire with scientists, conspiracies to suppress it are deduced. This is from a great book by Carl Sagan called The Demon Haunted World. So we're going to look briefly at astrology, okay? And why are we going to do that? Well, because it's eminently testable. It's not a matter of belief, it's actually open to test. So in 2008, Harris Poll found 31% of Americans believe in astrology. And another 18% are not sure. So that's almost half of America that gives some or a lot of credibility to astrology. I find that amazing in 21st century America. Here's the thing, belief has nothing to do with it. It's testable. It's testable because you begin with the birthplace and birth time of a person, and then you draw a horoscope according to their rules, and you predict their personality. And all those things are objectively measurable, and so you can find out whether it works or not. And indeed, it's been tested many times. If you come up with an idea and it is widespread in some sense, whether it seems reasonable or not, if it's widespread, you'll get somebody interested in testing it. So it has been tested and it's failed many times. We're going to look at just one test. It happened to be done by MacArthur Genius Award winner Sean Carlson back at UCLA in the 1980s, which I was actually at UCLA in the 1980s. That's where I got my PhD. I didn't know Carlson at the time, although I contacted him a little later and we had a few brief friendly hellos. But yeah, so here's the test he conducted. He got 28 astrologers, not one, but 28. And these were selected by their peers as the best astrologers in the business. And he got 116 real people. It'd be nice if we had 1,000 people, but 116 is still pretty good. For each client's chart, the astrologers were provided 3 anonymous personality profiles, one with the client and 2 others chosen at random. These personality profiles came from real people and were compiled using questionnaires known as the California Personality Inventory, the CPI. It's a widely used measure and scientifically accepted personality test. It measures all kinds of things like aggressiveness, dominance, femininity, etc., from a long series of multiple choice questions that the person themselves fills out. So what did they find? Well, again, so there was one that was valid and then there was 2 that were random. So the prediction by the scientists would be that, well, they should guess right no better than 1/3 of the time. The astrologers, you'd have thought, would have shown more confidence in themselves, but in fact they didn't. They only guaranteed that they would get at least 50% of their guesses correct. I always am a little surprised by that. It doesn't sound like they're as confident as you might think if they're really total believers in astrology. But anyway, the study strenuously attempted to avoid any bias by having the astrologers themselves help him design the test so that everybody agreed, yes, this is a good test, and we're confident that we can do at least 50%. But in fact, what they found was no better than a random chance. In fact, it's worse than that because here's the graph. And there's wide error bars because unfortunately they only had 116 people and they had to put them into all these different bins. But still the error bars do make a conclusive case that it is entirely consistent with 33%, which is random chance. And none of them were better than 40-some%, even at the middle weight. But here's what's interesting. There's a negative slope to this line. That means the more confident the astrologers were that they had the right match, the less accurate they were. Okay? Higher weight means high confidence. And the higher the weight, all the way up here, weight equals 12. Weight equals 10, excuse me. That was the worst. So they failed the test. Okay, astrologers participated strongly in the design and the execution of the experiment, but note their reaction to the results. Astrologers' reactions so far have been pretty much what I expected, said Carlson to the Skeptical Inquirer. You can read the interview there. Astrologists whom I didn't test are saying that the test was not fair because I did not test them. Of course, if I had tested them and not tested the others, then the astrologers I actually tested would now be saying that the test was not fair because I didn't test them. So you kind of can't win. I attended a NCGR party. I was the only non-astrologer in the house. I was very disappointed in what it largely consisted of as personal attacks on him, on Sean Carlson. And the few substantive criticisms were attributable to ignorance of the experiment, of the CPI, and of basic scientific methodology. I'd have liked to have heard that some of the astrologers, at least some of them, would have said, wow, we really participated in the design of this experiment, and look, we totally failed. Is it possible that astrology actually isn't what we thought? Maybe the only reason we seem to do better when we cast horoscopes from people in front of us is all the information we get by just looking at a person. Okay, we are all geniuses at reading other people. We kind of have to be, okay? One of the prime things for carrying on your genes is locating friends and tribes and potential mates, okay? So you really have to control for that. That's why they designed the test the way they did. So nobody saw or looked at or knew anything except for the CPI about the people, okay? You couldn't look at somebody and get something from them and then have the person themselves say, yeah, that really does fit me. Wow, you really understand me. Because we all, if we're going to spend money and go to an astrologer, we probably do have that bias that we kind of really want it to work. We don't want to think that we just paid money for nothing. So the key takeaway point is there's no correlation, and therefore there is no evidence of any cause and effect. So one of the things you might be thinking is, well, wait a minute, Rick, how could you really say for sure that there isn't some subtle physics effect, some quantum field that we haven't discovered yet that connects the planets and connects people and the spiritual cosmic unconscious that maybe permeates everything that you just haven't discovered yet? And my answer to that would be, yeah, well, we can't disprove that there isn't, I can't tell you that, no, there's absolutely no cosmic unconscious. We can't tell you, we absolutely know every quantum field that ever could be. I cannot tell you that, that's true. But it's irrelevant. It's irrelevant because there is no correlation between the personalities and the astrological projections. And therefore, there's nothing that needs an explanation. If you did see a correlation, or in fact, even if you saw a strong anti-correlation, even an anti-correlation would be saying there is some connection there, just maybe they got it backwards. That would be really interesting. Then you'd have to come up with a mechanism. That first thing you do is if you thought you saw that, you'd probably test it another 10 times because it's such an extraordinary thing. But if eventually you were convinced, yes, there's something real here, this is actually real, there really is a connection, this is not bogus, this is real, well, then you'd have to think for some amazing, subtle, undiscovered mechanisms by which the planets could affect personality. But if there's no correlation, then there's no evidence of any cause and effect, and so there's nothing to explain. There is nothing needing explanation. I hope you all understand that. So I just went through that. I did have a student once who brought that up, said, oh, well, wait a minute, Rick, correlation is not necessarily causation. And that's true. Correlation between things is not necessarily causation. But lack of correlation is cause for believing there is no causation. So the converse is not the same. Okay, but I already explained that. I don't want to beat it to death. So if the mind works, there's only one reality, reality being that which actually exists. In other words, the natural. The idea of the paranormal provides no explanatory power, and postulating the paranormal demotivates looking for a non-contradictory natural explanation. History has shown the success of just keep doggedly working at something until you find a proper explanation. Now, I loved watching The X-Files as much as anybody. I thought it was a great show. But, you know, it was a show. It was a TV program. All right. And great quote from Galileo. I do not feel obliged to believe that the same God who has endowed us with sense, reason, and intellect has intended us to forego their use.